On one beautiful clear night, a couple was relaxing around a campfire. The area was very secluded, so they were surprised to see a man walking towards them. The man was dressed oddly, as if he were in clothing from another time. The figure continued to walk toward them. And when the man reached the edge of the fire, he did not stop, but he walked straight through the campfire as if it weren't there. He simply kept walking, ignoring the flames and the people. The couple ran for their car, terrified by the encounter. New River Beach is a beautiful seacoast community in New Brunswick. There are several tales of hauntings on or around New River Beach. A lost sailor who beckons people, a beautiful woman who is glimpsed on the rocky cliffs, and the ghosts who haunt a nearby mansion called the Night House. All of these hauntings are connected to the tragic sinking of the ship Genii.
Now, the Genii seem to have been ill-fated from the beginning. The plan was to launch the ship on a Friday, which was considered the worst day to do so. The ship had been under construction for 3 building seasons, which was also considered bad luck, and when it was finally slid down the ways, the ship landed on its side instead of a proper entry into the water. Nonetheless, the ship was fitted out in St. Andrews, taken on a trial run around the island of Grand Manan. Everything seemed to be okay, and off they went to New River Beach and the night mill where they were to load deals. When they sailed up the bay in December of 1868 and arrived off New River Island, they had on board 4 sailors, or 4 experienced seamen, and 7 men from Mascarene whose job was to unload the ballast stone and load the deals. They had no experience as sailors at all, and this may have led to the tragedy that was to follow. After they had unloaded the ballast, they went into Haggerty's Cove to have a few drinks. The pilot, the man who knew the waters the best, had a little too much to drink and stayed in Haggerty's Cove for the night. But the 11 men, their captain, went back aboard the ship. It was a calm evening, but it wasn't to stay that way for this tremendous gale that was blowing up the coast of Maine and entering the Bay of Fundy. When it struck the ship, it struck with a vengeance. With only 4 experienced men aboard, it flipped over in the storm and dragged into the cove by Knight's Mill. There, 4 men were found the next morning in the cove. The rest of the men, they were found along the shore of New River Beach within the next day or 2. The Genii, when it came ashore, it was just in front of the Night House, and this was where the first 4 bodies were brought up so that the coroner could come from St. George and examine the bodies. One body, though, did not show up for about 6 weeks later. That was the body of John Ryu, and his body drifted in the opposite direction of tides and winds and ended up at what they called at that time Barnabas Point. Today, that particular area is called Dead Man's Cove.
Almost immediately, stories began to be told about a ragged sailor who had been seen wandering the beach. Those who saw him claimed that he called out and beckoned them to come closer, but few did. The sailor seemed confused, as if he didn't know how he had come to be there. Since the sailor was seen at Dead Man's Cove, people decided he must be John Ryu, the sailor whose body washed up on shore. These stories have continued to the present day.
I always wondered about the story. Then last winter, doing some research, I came across the actual finding of the body of John Ryu in Barnabas Head, or on Barnabas Head, in this cove that at that time had no name and which is now known as Dead Man's Cove. I concluded from this that this story of John had been in the community as a folk tale or folklore for many, many years, and that there was, in fact, some substance to that story.
One woman submitted a very frightening report to the local police department. She was driving past New River Beach when she saw a man standing in the road. He seemed to appear out of nowhere. She slammed on her brakes, but was certain she had hit him. She ran from the car to see if he was injured, but there was nobody there. The van was undamaged, and the police later found no sign of anyone. The woman was very frightened and embarrassed. Ironically, this would not be her last encounter with the ghosts of New River Beach. There's another ghost that walks the beach at New River. The same woman who had the vehicle encounter went to the shore one day. She saw a woman step out onto the high rocks about 20 yards away. The rocks are very treacherous, and she was concerned that the woman might jump, as she seemed very distraught. The woman turned toward her, and the moment they made eye contact, the mysterious woman vanished. There have been multiple encounters with this mystery woman, who always seems to be glimpsed on the high cliffs. One witness had gone down to the shore to meet a friend of his when he glimpsed the woman standing on the high rocks. Fearing that the woman might be suicidal, he called to her and ran to stop her.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
His friend on the other side of the rocks heard the yelling and looked up and clearly saw the woman. He ran to help her. When the first man got to the top, he saw the woman vanish. He thought she must have jumped, but there was no sign of her on the rocks below. Both men had seen the same thing, but there was nobody there. There is one possible explanation. Records in the area indicate that the wife of one of the Genai's crew was shattered by the loss. She spent her days staring out into the ocean, hoping that he would return, even though he had been buried months ago. Eventually, her sadness became too much for her to bear, and she climbed these very rocks and threw herself off into the sea.
Well, you got all the ingredients here for a great ghost story. A ship that goes down with all hands on board, bodies washed onto the shore, one body missing. What could have happened to that body? That body eventually sweeps up on shore as well. Then you've got a windswept beach, and over the course of time, lots of opportunity for people to either imagine ghostly figures walking down the beach at night because they're feeling kind of nervous and expecting ghosts, or perhaps to see some stranger walking down the beach and interpret this as the ghost of the dead sailor or the dead sailor's wife or lover.
The beach is not the only haunted spot. Atop the cliffs is the night house, where the crew of the Genai was laid out. The house has remained haunted since that tragic day.
I'm Phyllis Farquharson, and I moved into this house back in 1984. It was known as the Night House at that time.
Phyllis recalled one very unusual experience. She had come home from work early and was exhausted. There were heavy curtains throughout the house, used to keep out the draft, but it was a warm day, so she left them open. She hung her coat up and left the closet door open to air and went upstairs. She was on the phone when she heard noises downstairs. She clearly heard the sound of curtains being pulled shut and of a heavy door slamming. She asked her friend to stay on the line and went downstairs to investigate. As she came down the stairs, the noises stopped, and the house became completely silent. She discovered that the closet door had been slammed shut, and that the curtains had been pulled closed. She was the only person in the house. Doors opening and closing were very common phenomena. Often Phyllis would be upstairs and would hear the doors continuously slamming shut. The noise would stop the instant somebody came down the stairs.
Things would move around in the house, too. You'd put something down and you'd go back for it and it wouldn't be there.
Certain objects seemed to attract the ghost at the night house, especially antiques. Phyllis was brushing her hair with an antique brush she had been given. She set the brush down and left the room for a moment. As she was walking down the hall, she felt as if she were being watched, just a feeling, a presence near her. She turned back to her room and found that the brush had been moved from the dresser to the bed. This was not the first time that this had happened. The new owners of the night house have not had any ghostly experiences. Maybe the renovation of the night house has allowed the ghosts of the genii to move on. New River Beach is a very unique ghost story where one tragic event has led to 3 documented hauntings. Whether it is the lost sailor, or the lady on the cliff, or the hauntings of the night house, there are too many reports to dismiss the tales of New Brunswick's most haunted beach.
Beban House, a beautiful home of the early 1930s, is now a landmark heritage building in Nanaimo. It's also one of the most haunted places on mid-Vancouver Island. In the basement of Beban House is a storage area, a large room where they store boxes of pamphlets and brochures. Staff don't like going down there because when they do, often they hear heavy thumping overhead, as if somebody is dropping a very, very heavy object in the room directly overhead. Of course, no one is ever there. And one lady who heard these sounds for the first time ran out. She wouldn't come back into the building until she was assured that there was nothing there. Of course, there never is anything that people can see. Frank Beban was born in New Zealand and arrived in North America and did very well in the lumber business. Ended up in Nanaimo, British Columbia. And in the 1930s, he'd done so well, he decided to buy a huge estate just north of town, and he built a fabulous house, but in the early 1950s, he died. And after that, the house was sold, and by the mid-1990s, it was in such bad repair, they were going to tear it down until the heritage people got a hold of it, and they decided it was worth saving. And so they did. They restored the outside of it, and the inside was converted to offices. Now, Beban House is the home to Tourism Nanaimo. During the 1990s, a preschool used the Beban House, and a very interesting phenomenon took place. Although adults never saw the apparition, many of the children in the preschool did.
Well, one of the interesting happenings that's happened in the house was in the mid-'80s, when the house was used primarily as a daycare center and an after-school center. One of the leaders that had been working here for some time had one of the little boys come into the kitchen where the children were playing and coloring and such, and had asked where the little boy was, and he said that he was outside playing with the little boy with the red ball. She asked which boy that he was talking about, as the children were all accounted for. She asked him to draw a picture of the little boy. And she was shocked to see that it was the same picture that had been drawn by another 4-year-old 4 years earlier.
At the time of the preschool, only the children had seen the apparition of the child with the white gown and the red ball. But many years later, one of the former adult employees of the preschool was in the building and happened to see something out of the corner of her eye, and then she saw a child with a white gown and a red ball running up the stairs. She remembered the stories that the children had told her, and she ran up the stairs looking for it, but absolutely no one was there. This is the first instance we know of a validation of what those children had seen many years ago. Didn't take long before people realized that this was probably one of the children of the Beban's Chinese servant.
It's important to understand that children, young children, are very poor at reality testing. They literally cannot tell the difference sometimes between what's fantasy, what's imagination on the one hand, what's real on the other. Lots of children have imaginary friends. But the young child actually believes and claims to be able to see the imaginary friend. It's all part of normal development. Gradually the child learns to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. If adults start to take this seriously, they may either think the child has some kind of mental disturbance, which isn't the case, or that there's literally some kind of ghost out there that the child sees. So one of the possibilities is that the suggestible teacher or adult says the child has seen something, the child has seen a ghost, forgetting that the child may have been fantasizing or forgetting that there may have been some normal explanation for this. Over time, naturally, then as people start to take this story seriously, all sorts of things tend to confirm it. It becomes impossible to dissuade people about it. They're convinced that they've had first-hand experience with the little boy and the red ball.
Another interesting story was a while ago, some of our staff were working in an office here, and our offices have French doors in them that, as you'd expect to find in an old building of this kind. And all of a sudden they saw a flash and something hit the French doors with such force that it damaged the lead beading in the door. And they couldn't find what it was that hit the door. They never found, and there was nobody else in the building at the time. So just the staff, they presumed that the little boy with the red ball was playing with his ball and just wanted a little bit of company that day.
The basement of Beban House is very haunted, particularly the room where the servant family had lived. That's where the child that played with the red ball had lived and apparently still wanders, because people see things down there, out of the corner of their eye, shadowy shapes. Some have said they have seen the child with the red ball just wandering in and out of the rooms in the basement of Beban House. People hear footsteps running up and down the stairs at Beban House. Although some people just pass this off, some people can't. They're very unnerved by this.
We've had some interesting experiences, the people that work here. A little while ago, my bookkeeper was working away in her office, and all of a sudden I heard this little ooh sound. What the heck? Get up out of my desk and walk over to where she is. And she's coming out of the office just as I'm meeting her. And she says, there's this little yellow powder all over everything coming from the ceiling. And I say, yeah, right, there's nothing that can come from the ceiling. And so walked into her office, and sure enough, the desk is covered with this little yellow powder. So we dusted it off, and she went back to work. I went back to my office, and I no sooner got back to my office and the same thing, oh, this sound. But as soon as I walked into her office, the powder shower, as it will, stopped. We did this another time, so 3 times the little powder fell from the ceiling.
When Frank Beban built his house, he put all the most modern fixtures inside, including beautiful ornate doorknobs. They're still there. They're very difficult to get off when people have purposely tried to take them off, and yet there's something very strange about those doorknobs, because when people are going to open the doors, the doorknobs just pull off in their hands.
Every spring, several of them fall off. And we don't know why they fall off, but they do, and they get screwed back on, and we check that they're tight, and everything is fine indeed until the next spring. It may be a whimsical ghost playing with us here.
If you believe that ghosts are inhabiting your building, you can come to attribute anything to them. If a doorknob doesn't work or it falls off, that's the ghost. Of course, if you're in an old building and the doorknobs are old, they're going to fall off from time to time anyway. And so anytime they fall off or anytime a door lock jams, you can take that as evidence of the ghost. It's interesting that people often see patterns in time. So people may say, oh yes, this happens more at one time of the year than another. If people keep records of when doorknobs fall off, I would be quite certain they'll find that the pattern that they perceive is not the real pattern that's there.
On one occasion, there was an event one evening at Beban House, and the following morning, early, a staff member came in. She was washing some dishes in the downstairs kitchen. and she wondered what was going on upstairs. Laughter, noises, teacups rattling. It sounded like somebody was having a great time. A tea party, she thought. Well, shortly, a staff member came in and joined her, and she said, "What's going on upstairs?" She hadn't had time to go and check herself. He said, "There's nobody upstairs. We're here alone in the building." Very modern ghostly phenomenon is voicemail. It seems that the ghosts at Beban House like to play with the voicemail.
At Halloween last year, we had an event here, and we had hundreds and hundreds of children coming to Beban House to enjoy a pretty spooky experience. And we had a spooky experience of our own that night. I was working during the evening, and my office door was closed. But when I left, I thought, well, there were still a few people around, so we should leave the office looking a little bit in keeping with the event.
And as part of the effect, he left his phone dangling off the hook. No one bothered to put it back that evening, so the phone was completely engaged all evening. When he went in the next morning, he put it back on and just happened to listen. There was a voicemail message. Obviously, no one could have called in the night before, but there, on the voicemail, was the sound of thumping. It was really quite unnerving. And also, noises, laughter, people running, almost like children had been playing in the building. A female employee one morning came in and listened to her voicemail messages at Beban House, and she was amazed to hear thumping. On the voicemail, it went on for some time, just as though somebody had been walking through the entire house during the night, but somehow it was recorded on the voicemail. She was really quite frightened. The voicemail at Beban House is very haunted. On the second floor of Beban House, where the family's bedrooms were, people have seen the form of a very attractive woman.
One of the housemates tells a story that happened a couple of years ago to him. He was leaving his office, just locking up, and he turned around. Just out of the corner of his eye, he saw a woman standing at the doorway to our office, and he turned around completely to see who it was, and of course there was no one there.
And they don't know who she is. Some have speculated it could be Mrs. Beban herself. Beban House is a landmark heritage building in Nanaimo, and it's had an interesting history with lots of ghosts. A small child, the ghost of a beautiful woman, footsteps, and an array of other things. It's one of the most haunted places on mid-Vancouver Island.
One of the most fascinating mysteries across Canada is its lake monsters. Whether we're talking about Ogopogo and Lake Okanagan or Champlain Lake Champlain, lake monsters are a definite part of Canada's mysteries. And Quebec has its own lake monster, Memphry, in Lake Memphry-Magog. The 35-foot Memphry has been documented throughout history. However, a local historian and researcher, Jacques Boisvert, has collected data, drawings, videos, photographs, and eyewitness accounts to further attest to the proof of the existence of the serpent that they call Memphry, who resides in the waters of Lake Memphry-Magog, Quebec.
Bonjour les amis, my name is Jacques Boisvert. I'm from Magog. I'm a own resident of this place, been here all my life, and we're here today to talk to you about the sea creatures called the sea serpent of Lake Memphry-Magog by the name of Memphry. The gentleman, his name is Gérard Charland. He lives in Omerville, not far from here. And he phoned me up someday and he came to my office, and boy, I mean, was he excited. He said, I saw something yesterday. I said, what have you seen? Well, he said, I was fishing. I was near the Saint-Benoît-du-Lac, the abbey there. And he said, suddenly I saw on my sonar, I saw something big, and I turned around and I saw something coming out of the water. Not only said that we saw it, but we recorded it on a chart of his sonar. This is what he saw was coming up, and this is the same thing coming down here. And he explained that it came up on surface and that he could see it.
Photos and video are another example of the fleeting evidence that plague the world of the paranormal, especially when investigating a creature such as a lake monster. Videos are shaky, photographs are blurry. To the believer, it's evidence. To the skeptic, it's nothing else but a log in the water or a moose in the middle of a lake.
Sometimes it's more exciting. People will want to see a lake monster, and they'll look for it, and they'll find something that satisfies that craving because it makes it exciting. But also basic perception is very important. I talked to an experienced bird watcher who told me that he was at Point Pelee Park with a whole bunch of other bird watchers, people who had long experience, and he saw a particular bird that wasn't supposed to be in Canada ever. And he saw it from a distance through binoculars. And other people came and they watched it. And they noted down what it was. I don't remember what the kind of bird it was. But he said as it got closer and closer and closer, they realized it was a Cessna aircraft. So when experienced bird watchers can be fooled in seeing an airplane as a bird, it's not hard to understand how inexperienced watchers can interpret a log or a shadow or something on a lake as a sea monster. And let's face it, it'd be exciting to see one. If there is a sea monster, I'd love to see it. So if I'm walking along the shores of Lake Memphry, Magog, for example, and if I really think that sea monsters exist, boy, I'd sure like to get one, get a picture of one, see one. That makes me all the more prone to suggestibility.
I was amazed a few years ago when this woman that lives in Toronto phoned me up and says that she had a video of something she had witnessed not far from where I live, near the Three Sisters Island.
She had a video camera and captured what might be the best evidence of Memphry to date. She went to Jacques and showed him the video. The tape was studied extensively, and there is no sign of fraud or any tampering with the image whatsoever. The woman sought no financial gain from the tape and did not attempt to gain any publicity from it. This tape stands as the best evidence that there actually is a lake monster in Quebec's Lake Memphry Magog, known as Memphry.
We have over 200 sightings right now. Most of what the people would tell me would say, armed creature, snake-like, very big. They always speak about between 20 to 30 feet. And it's always seen when the lake is calm.
One of the most frustrating parts about investigating and researching a phenomena is lack of evidence. For example, lake monsters. If they exist, how come we've never found one of their carcasses? It's very simple. It sinks to the bottom. However, the scientific community will not accept the existence of a lake monster or Sasquatch without the proof of its existence being its carcass. Some glimpses of dead creatures have actually been seen. For example, the carcass that was brought aboard a Japanese trawler. Well, unfortunately, before the scientific community could actually do its investigation on this crucial piece of evidence, because it smelled, it was released and turned back into the sea.
I don't think any airsea will see sightings. If people tell me something, they have to sign a paper. Otherwise, I'm not interested in taking these sightings.
Remember the story of the coelacanth that had been thought to have been extinct for millions of years, that was recently caught off the shores of India. The coelacanth had never been caught, photographed, and yet this scientist, walking through a market in India, recognized it. Thus, an unsolved mystery of past times has been solved. And maybe one day, people like Jacques Boisvert and his investigation will come up with the clue that will prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that Canada's lake monsters really do exist.
There's quite a famous house situated in White Rock, British Columbia. It is the home of a well-known artist by the name of John Andredy. John is quite a famous artist. Famous people throughout North America have acquired his work. There's one other unusual side to John. John Andredy lives in a haunted house. John's experienced some very unusual activity in this house. One time, John was working up on the roof deck when he felt the presence of his wife behind him. And then when he glanced behind him, he realized it wasn't his wife, but the figure of a man wearing white coveralls.
There was a man standing about 2 feet behind me as I painted, and he said to me, "What do you suppose you're doing here?" I said to him, "I'm painting my deck."
John was beside himself. He couldn't figure out who this figure was. Who was the man dressed in white coveralls?
And he turned and walked away. So I dashed down my stairs, ran to my front door, reached for it and pulled, and the door was locked. It was as if the fellow, the man was never there.
Some people might be surprised that John didn't seem that astonished by finding a man in white coveralls appearing on the rooftop of his house. After all, John's home is a very popular spot for tourists. His home is in every guidebook in the area. He eventually confessed this experience to a neighbor, who in turn revealed the story of the house. Apparently, there was a painter who was painting the deck roof and suffered a heart attack and died there. We do know there was a death there, and possibly a spirit remained.
Well, the Andredy house is a very eccentric place, deliberately so, designed by an artist. Artists are fantasy-prone almost by definition. Artists listen to emotion. Artists fantasize, use their imagination, blend it with reality to produce art. And so many artists are going to be much more sympathetic to the notion of ghosts than non-artists. So here you've got an eccentric house to begin with. I'm not sure exactly how the legend of the ghost began. It could either be some fantasy on the part of the artist mistaking other stimulation as being the ghost and then looking for a story to back it up and finding that someone had once died in the roof. Or it could be the knowledge of someone having died in the roof leading to speculation as to whether or not there's a ghost, and leading someone who has a good imagination to, again, interpret things in terms of a ghostly influence on otherwise normal events. But you put it all together, you've got an eccentric house, you've got something that starts to attract attention even from tourists, and a good ghost story certainly helps add to the eccentricity.
On another night, John and his wife, Susan, were awakened by their dogs barking. Susan got up thinking there might be somebody at the front door. As she opened the front door, she was shocked to see a young woman dressed in a white chiffon gown and barefoot.
She was standing on the other side of my glass door looking at me, and I was looking at her, and it was very, it wasn't really scary, but it was strange. And so I called for my husband, because I was a bit freaked out. So I called, and my husband was talking to her. She wouldn't respond. She just, stared at us.
The young lady refused to speak. Susan, knowing that something was wrong, encouraged her to come in, but she didn't. She closed the door behind her and went to phone the authorities to find out if anyone was missing. After she got off the phone, she was shocked to see the young girl walking throughout the house. Eventually, the young girl made her way to the rooftop stairs. The young girl had simply vanished in thin air.
She wasn't scary. She just seemed to want us to know she was there. It was all very strange.
Yeah, when you're dealing with a house that's painted all different kinds of colors, and there are all kinds of strange objects and so forth in the house, then it to some extent throws a person's normal perception off. You're dealing with new stimulation you're not used to. And again, if there's any hint that there's a ghost story associated with this, that's likely to make it more easy to misperceive things and come to interpret them in terms of some kind of ghostly presence.
One day while I was working, I thought I'd seen someone that was trying to take the tour of our home. She was dressed in white silken clothing, and I followed after her, and I could see the woman plainly. And when I followed up after her, she was gone.
The spirits are attracted to this home And the grounds, because there's an energy of creativity happening here, may be one of the reasons why this young girl who appears in a white gown finds the need to enter the home at night.
Saxs Fish and Chip restaurant in Keswick opened up in the 1950s. Since that time, it's become a very popular spot for locals arriving for dinner. However, now they have a new set of customers called ghosts.
I feel there's a huge crowd of people behind me. I've never really experienced this before. Perhaps with everyone talking and all the energy that we're giving off, it's drawing the spirits closer to us.
The night of the investigation, our psychic picked up about 14 different spirits here, I believe.
Carolyn was very close to her uncle, Eddie, who cared for her. And when he passed away, it's quite possible that he ended up remaining her guardian in the restaurant.
My parents purchased the property in March 6th of 1949, and when anything weird or unusual happened, we just kind of filed it in the Uncle Eddie category. Uncle Eddie passed away in 1969 when I was really little. Uncle Eddie came to live with us when I was about a year old, and he was I guess you'd call it Alzheimer's now. We didn't know what it was then, so my parents had him move in with us. And he used to take care of me when my parents were running the restaurant. So he was kind of like my built-in babysitter. He lived with us. And I remember being in my pajamas and the sun was coming up and he was sitting in his chair and he was like, it's okay, sweetie, I want you to go back to bed now. Everything's fine, everything will be great. You just go on back to bed now and I'll see you a little later. So I went back to bed, did what I was told, went back into bed and I heard a little bit of commotion out in the living room area a couple hours later. My mom came into my bedside and she knelt down and she said, honey, I just want you to stay in bed for a little bit because there's some men here and they've come to take Uncle Eddie away because Uncle Eddie died last night. It didn't bother me because I knew he was still here. And I still have this sense that, you know, he said everything was going to be okay. But I knew he was gone, but he wasn't.
Carolyn, the owner, who also works in the kitchen as a cook, has had a number of experiences. One of them being when she turns the gas stove on and then turns around, goes back to the stove later, the knob has been turned off.
There have been a few incidences in the kitchen with other staff members where they have had light objects tossed in their direction and have struck them that haven't fallen off a shelf or really seem to almost come out of nowhere.
Pots and pans and other objects have a tendency to move on their own. And Carolyn has witnessed this, felt the presence in this kitchen, and perhaps it might be her Uncle Eddie.
And it hasn't been until recently that we've really had a lot of people coming in and seeing different sized people, different dressed people, children. It's been brought to my knowledge that it's not necessarily just Uncle Eddie doing these things. That's why they didn't always fit in with his personality type or his physical description.
One time, a psychic visited the restaurant and reported a number of spirits inhabiting the dwelling. For example, there's a little girl that's seen at the front entrance skipping by a table.
I felt the presence of a child around me, and I turned and looked. There was this young child, maybe about 7 years old, standing behind me. She seems to flit around from table to table. Anytime there's children here, she seems to be drawn to the children.
The little girl that's seen at the front of the restaurant also likes to climb up and sit on the counter. I wonder whose attention she's seeking.
The child is here. The child is sitting on that stool, watching, smiling. I can see her.
Well, when it comes to psychics, there's never been a case where a psychic who claims to have these special psychic abilities has been able to demonstrate them under conditions that rule out either misperception or fraud or whatever. So we should be very cautious about psychics even to begin with. But if a psychic walks into a room and claims to be seeing things here, there, and all over, people who are not very cautious may, in fact, take this as they might take eyewitness testimony, A psychic could look at anything and say anything, and some people would believe that. It's interesting, the old traditional used car dealer would tell people things, but people were naturally suspicious of used car dealers because they expected them to mislead them somewhat. Psychics earn their reputation by doing psychic things. The psychic has a vested interest in getting people around him or her to believe that they are psychic. And so one should, for that reason as well, be particularly cautious about people who claim to be psychics. In some sense, the psychic is perhaps the worst witness in the world, because the psychic has something to prove, in a sense. The psychic is out to prove that he or she is psychic. That's his or her reputation. And so there's probably less credibility associated with that kind of report than there is with somebody who has nothing to prove.
At the moment, there's a very, very strong feeling of anger. I think there's more fear, but fear and anger can be combined. This entity here is not pleased with what's happening. I'm feeling very anxious that I want to get out of here. There's an oily feeling to my skin. It's very thick in that corner, and I really feel that there could be a danger in here.
One spirit that resides in the basement appears to be quite an evil person. Most of the employees working in the restaurant fear for themselves in terms of going down into this basement. That's a place they do not want to go.
My staff doesn't like going to the basement. Just more an overwhelming sense of a bad sense about the basement. I've had a few staff members know exactly what spot we're talking about on the floor, literally within like a 3x3 space. They're like, I know he's there because I walk through there and it's just like takes your breath away. You feel cold or chilled. The hair on the back of your neck stands up. You just feel extremely uncomfortable and you want to get away as soon as you possibly can.
The man downstairs is not happy, and he's been there for a long time. He's very, very angry, and I didn't feel comfortable with him at all.
Down in the basement, we had a couple of encounters. Something grabbed onto my pant leg, tugged 3 times. I just carried on, and about 30 seconds later, I felt a hand on my leg, and it squeezed 3 times. After that, I finished up what I was doing and went into the upstairs area.
If there's a lot of activity within a home or a building of some sort, happiness, sadness, anxiety, whatever, the energy lingers. And there must be something here that pulls the entities or the spirits or the energy to this spot. And they're waiting to pass on. I don't know. Waiting to be reincarnated. I don't know. That's the big question.
We do know that Uncle Eddie is probably in the kitchen with Carolyn. We don't know who is in the basement. That presence is unexplained. And we also know that perhaps the restaurant, there was something there before that restaurant. We don't know what it was, what had happened there, and it remains unexplained.